Today's next speaker is a new voice to GIA from the very field we serve, and she has also been a grant maker. She represents community-based arts organizations. And while community-based arts organizations are finally getting the recognition they deserve for the role they play in poor, underserved, and sometimes forgotten communities, which are also filled with a lot of artists, funders are constantly challenged on how to best serve them for a host of reasons. Our speaker, Kakuna Kerina, is from the village of Harlem, where I have lived on and off for most of my life. Harlem has hundreds of arts organizations which have fits and starts at any given time. Kakuna Kerina represents one of those remaining institutions, and as with most community-based arts institutions, this was started by an artist committed to the greater good, the late Dorothy Maynor, who founded Harlem School of the Arts in 1964. Maynor was the first Black artist to perform at Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. In 1952, she also performed at the inauguration for President Dwight Eisenhower. And in 1953, upon retiring from singing, she founded the Harlem School of the Arts. In 1975, she was the first Black member of the Metropolitan Opera Board, and in that same year, she raised $3.5 million to build a new school, the Harlem School of the Arts, which had operated prior to that in a basement. I first met Kakuna Kerina 3 years ago when I was transitioning from being the regional manager of the Northeast at the J.P. Morgan Chase Foundation to the National Director for Arts and Culture. I had arranged to take the new head of the Northeast and her new community relations officer to Harlem to visit a few of our partners. And our last stop was the Harlem School of the Arts. I was particularly excited because I had heard the Harlem School of the Arts had a new president and CEO. While this was no longer my relationship, this is an institution in my community where the children of my family and friends attended, and the late Betty Allen, who led the school after Dorothy Maynor, was a friend. And I am a beneficiary of community-based arts organizations. We left the visit pretty upbeat. A new leader had returned to the village of Harlem from Africa and was on a mission to keep the place humming, and I knew this would be no easy task. The school had never really recovered from the NEA cuts under the Reagan administration, and let's be clear, the remaining community-based arts institutions founded 30 years ago were significantly funded according to their budget or dependent on the NEA. While the Harlem School of the Arts had an established track record of turning out an impressive number of artists, you just heard one, after Kakuna's arrival, I began to experience the significant role it played in the greater community. Art exhibits by local artists, open big band and jazz rehearsals, increased involvement by older adults as participants and volunteers. Even the MTA bus driver pointed out the school when he drove by to the passengers. Radio personalities on both classical and jazz stations talked about the school's artistic programs. People were interested in renting the place for all sorts of events. Increased booking in the school's talent. The school had succeeded in reaching the growing Latino community in Harlem. Programs for Harlem's growing population of children in foster care were started. Its impact on local small businesses, and the list goes on. Often, community-based arts organizations are referred to as anchors, but they are really not that solid. 2 years later, Kakuna shared with me that she had lived and worked in war-torn Africa. Her father is African. They had survived military coups and civil unrest. But the challenges of running an organization in the village of Harlem appeared to be more difficult. I knew for a fact that she had raised more than $4 million annually, but like many community-based arts organizations, making payroll on a consistent basis is a fantasy. I share all this with you because part of being hopeful about the role of community-based arts organizations is also about being realistic. And while the Harlem School of the Arts is in the village of Harlem, It's really a mirror of what is happening all around the country. Communities such as Harlem, with their classifications as cultural districts, where the arts organizations are driving an economic resurgence, are really not benefiting in a real way. Today we hear from a cultural leader who, during her 3 years at Harlem School of the Arts, turned it into a comprehensive nonprofit serving more than 3,000 students. Kakuna has also worked extensively in the area of human rights, HIV/AIDS, access to justice for women with the International League of Human Rights, the United Nations Development Program, and the Committee to Protect Journalists. As executive director of the Open Space Society Initiative for West Africa, a Soros Foundation based in Senegal, Kakuna supported nonprofits and public institutions in 18 North, West, and North African nations. She continues to advise domestic and international nonprofits, foundations, and private sector institutions on fundraising, grant-making, and corporate social investments here in the United States and in sub-Saharan Africa. Please welcome Kakuna Kerina.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Clifford. Every time I see one of our students from any of our institutions, it just brings such great joy and pride, and also reinforces why we do what we do. Janet, the staff and board of Grantmakers in the Arts, and you, its members, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to participate in this recession conference as you assess the current state of the arts and draw upon your wealth of creativity and expertise to identify new solutions to the challenges facing our artists and our arts institutions. Janet has given you a lot about my background, and I'll just skim over that briefly and how it helped me, but also in a way hindered me in in facing and overcoming some of the challenges that I was addressing at the Harlem School of the Arts. I moved to West Africa, to Senegal, 2 months after September 11th of 2001 to set up the Soros Foundation and to establish the foundation's work throughout West Africa. It was an interesting time because at any given moment, about 30 to 40% of my countries were either engaged in conflict, emerging from conflict, or on the verge of falling or erupting back into conflict. Prior to joining the foundation, I had worked in sub-Saharan Africa for international human rights organizations, so the terrain was very familiar to me. But the mandate to promote open societies through direct support to community-based organizations was very new to me at such a scale. I was fortunate to come from a family that was an exile family that was very involved in the independence movements in Africa. As I was growing up from the 50s through our independence, Namibia in 1990, and I can't tell you how similar the experiences were that I had traveling around the region, sitting on a plane next to someone and introducing myself and having them turn around and say, "Oh, are you?" And I have to say, yes, I'm Brumba and Jane's daughter. With a name like Kakuna Kerina, it's pretty clear who your family is. But I say that because so much of what I benefited from in the way that I grew was, and what became most useful to me in incredibly challenging times, was the lesson that I learned from my parents about how important it was to be able to speak with anyone, to communicate with anyone. I experienced on so many occasions the need to advocate on behalf of those who couldn't advocate for themselves with the very people who had imprisoned them, who had executed their family members, and to be able to subsume myself at that time and really try to find and identify those voices of reason, find and identify the commonalities between us so that we could start to move an agenda forward that would ultimately open up a space for people to be able to start to take care of themselves and advocate for themselves and be productive.